Welcome back to the End of Violence. This is episode 2 of our series on the revolving door, where we look at the real stories behind recidivism. In episode 1, we talked about the cycle, how so many people end up back in prison after release. But today, we're going even deeper. We're going to just go with the basic question: why do people end up in prison to begin with? Because it's not always about being a criminal. Sometimes it's about poverty. Sometimes it's about trauma. Sometimes it's about survival. And sometimes it's about a system designed to catch certain people, not others. So today I want to introduce my two partners in crime here, no pun intended. I'd like to introduce you first to Atiba. What's up, Atiba? How are you doing?
I'm good, brother. How you doing?
I'm good. And also, coming from Tampa, Florida, uh, Pastor Andre. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, man. It's great to be back with you fellas.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing right now I'd love to talk. I want to ask the basic question, the big one. Why do you think there's so many people in this country that end up incarcerated?
I think the prison system is a machine, and we've gotten trapped into this cycle. Where the prisons are creating employment opportunities, revenue. I mean, you realize there's a lot of work done by contracted with corporations, even companies for prisons. But if you look at it from the juvenile system, the enforcement, law enforcement, justice system, everything is profiting off of this cycle. I mean, it's creating a tremendous amount of revenue. And I think a lot of the history of prisons and their development is rooted in slavery. I mean, we go back into after the civil rights movement, and you look at some of like the Jim Crow practices of rounding up blacks and people of color and putting them in institutions. And it was the only way to really have legal slavery was, if this person is now convicted of a felony, I can kind of still generate some of the profit that I lost when at the end of the Civil War. And you got collective buy-in across the country because people say, "Hey, they're criminals. So what do we care if
Mhm.
if their rights are violated and they go back into a slave institution?"
Yeah, I can just roll right in with what you're saying there. There's a documentary called 13, and I was at like the premier preview of that movie some years back, and movie documentary. And basically, you know, the when they had the vagrancy laws, if we're going to take it back so that we can come forward to where why it's so disproportionate and why it's going on the way it is, the vagrancy laws that sundown laws and all sorts of laws that if you were black, you would be picked up and put into prison just for walking through a town in some instances. And the magistrate would have to adjudicate you and whatever. And uh, of course, a lot of people didn't have the money to get bailed out. So what would end up happening is they would go through the system and then they'd be farmed out. And Adiba touched on that in the last session. They'd be farmed out to different to the railroad, to different companies, and then that's moved forward. JP Morgan Chase, they've always been implicated in that. Can I say that kind of stuff on here? Just tell the truth.
Yes.
Hey, it's real.
JP Morgan Chase, the Rockefellers, all of the big name families that we know about, Vanderbilts, et cetera, have profited off of exploitation of some sorts of the lower income and of people of color. There's been a system of exploitation. And I often point the culprit to money and people that will do anything for it. And that's been a problem. So anyway, um, as Adiba said, it's been extremely profitable, and it is so there's been a disadvantaged group. Why? Because there's been a period of time, and again, I stay broad. I'll say black, but let me tell you something, impoverished people, period. By time in the days before Martin Luther King was killed, it was at the Poor People's March, not the Black People's March, not the White People's March, not the Asian people. It was at the Poor People's March where they had put tents up on a section over there by the mall, and they were coming for their check because they said you had given everybody else a check, give us our check, and then he was dead.
Yeah.
He had realized, he said to Harry Belafonte, I wonder if I've sent my people into a burning house.
Wow. Yeah.
We've gotten integration, but I wonder if I've sent my people. And that burning house had to use exploitation of poor people.
Hmm.
Whichever poverty is poverty. I don't care what color you are. And so poor people and that exploitation now has run its course. There's an embarrassment of wealth that has been created behind it, and so it can no longer operate. And that system has to be changed. And that's where we sit right now in this conversation. And that's a whole nother topic.
No, I'm glad you said that because it is such, like the divide in the United States is the racial barrier, black against white. But you're right. At the core of it all, it's the have against the have-nots. So
Mhm.
it really is poor people. And the only, I think, one of the big dividing factors with that is that, for black people, we look and we look at white people and we say, wow. Well, you can go fit in anywhere because you can leave your family and you can go assimilate into those larger groups. But you're right. I think you see even if you go, everybody focuses on African Americans and the percentages that we have in prison. But if you were really be interesting to do a study and run those numbers up against like Appalachian descendants, because we got, in Ohio, I mean, we have sides of town where there's like large Appalachian communities and they're no different. I mean, it's interesting. We have west side of Columbus, poor black people and poor white people grew up together. And it was like when I was a kid, it was one of the most racist sides of the city. It was always weird to me because white people would live on one street, black people would live on the next street, white people and so on and so forth. Black
Right.
people hated white people, the white people hated black people, but all the kids were mixed. Every damn kid you went to school with was light skinned, and it's like, what even in the most racist families will have like five or six mixed biracial grandkids. So and we all, everybody in our city always like, the West Side is a little different. Man, white, black, biracial, whatever you want to call it, they're all West Siders. You can put them in a bag and shake them up and pull one out. I don't care what color they are. It's the same shit.
Black people, and I feel everything you just said, man, and right in my heart. Black people do not have a trademark on poverty.
Right.
By the
Right.
numbers, they may say that there's a higher proportion when you look at the ratio of how many black people are in America and how many of us are imprisoned in the churn that we talked about and recidivism, which is the issue here. It's just a cycle. You just broken cycle, you just keep going back. But there's a lot more people of other races, if we call it ethnicities, etc., skin color, who are in that population as well, in larger numbers, ultimately, in a lot of ways, because a lot more people. And so
Yeah.
poverty, like in the 90s in Newark, New Jersey, in the 80s, when crack epidemic, I saw it was like you said, it was like going to school. In other
Yeah.
words, everybody was there in those streets.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
I was going to throw this out there since we used the scholarly aspect as well, and you dropped that gem earlier. Uh, Let me drop one here: the Hegelian dialectic. All right, Hegel, and Hegel came up with that. That's the thesis versus the antithesis, and then at the top of the pyramid, there's synthesis. And the question is, who's driving synthesis? All right,
Mm-hmm.
thesis versus is black versus white, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rich versus poor, haves versus the have-nots. But at the end
Right.
of the day, while we're caught up in that, and all you have to do is throw some fresh meat out through media. But while we're caught up in that, somebody else is driving the synthesis of where we're going with all of this. And that's why I said exploitation can no longer work. Economically, it's frowned upon now, right?
Right.
And if they're going to switch to a technologically driven setup where CCTV and they see everything we're doing, right? And we see a lot too of what's happening, then they've got to set it up in a way that it's beneficial to the people that hold the toll booths.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so, but however, if we're aware of the Hegelian dialectic, then we stop allowing ourselves to be polarized over topics and we actually discuss solutions.
Right, right, right.
And so, just to weigh in on where we are, it's like it is. I think one of the themes I'm hearing today is ultimately you and I can speak from a black perspective, but we've also seen a lot of things that let us know that this is a poverty issue. This is a social justice issue, you know.
Right, right, right. I mean, absolutely. That's exactly, I believe what was kind of like, what threatened the government most about Fred Hampton. You know, Chairman Fred Hampton was pushing for a Rainbow Coalition and saying, the Panthers movement started bringing all poor people together. That's really that's a big threat because he was like, wait,
Yeah.
wait, wait, this is poor people that need to be fighting against these systems.
School meals. I mean, keep going. It
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
was
Absolutely.
feeding the kids in the morning who weren't getting food at home because their parents were strung out on drugs or whatever was going on. They were uplifting the community.
Yeah.
So let me cut in really quick. What is your definition then of social justice?
We have a
So
soul. Yeah, go ahead.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead, Pastor.
I always like to wait and let you go first so I can gather my thoughts. You know, so I'll say this. Social justice, there's a social contract that have we've installed time and time again. It changes here and there when policies change and laws change. But there's a social contract, and everybody should be able to benefit from that social contract, right? A type of equity, but also parity. See, they talk about equity, but they don't talk about parity because
Mm,
parity
right.
looks, yeah. And so that's all they push on us is, yeah, equity in this, and equity is able to be dismantled because everything is not going to be equal. I mean, stop me if I'm lying.
You're right.
Everything, you mean if I work my behind off and I focus and I do what I'm supposed to do, that somebody else is supposed to be able to just come and do exactly what I did without the effort? I don't like that. And of course, the Christian church does offer that in some ways, says you can come at the last minute and still get the same salvation. But we're not talking about that salvation. We're talking about here and now on earth in a place where people are exploited every day, human trafficking.
Right.
Anyway, man, I got off and running. I don't even know if I answered the question, but yeah. Go ahead, Atiba, save me, man. Say something and then it'll
You
bring me
know,
back.
I mean, I think when you say social justice, to me, at the end of that kind of statement, it's going to be reflected in depending on where you're at in the spectrum. Um, I guess what I would ask you, Gershon, is like when you say social justice, are you looking at that from like more of an inner city community standpoint? How is justice received? Are you looking at it in a very global across the United States and trying to see is there like you know
When I hear about social justice, I mean, I hear it used in so many different ways, right? You have people who talk to it from a community level. You have people who talk to it from a nationwide level. But the problem is, I think that term has been very politicized,
Mhm.
and so the whole definition and meaning of it has just disappeared. It's no
mm,
longer there anymore to mean what it means. And Andre, I agree with you though. I look at the two of you and you're both successful, right?
Uh,
So was there social justice for you guys, or did you guys just work your ass off to get to where you are now?
they say that luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
you I was luck was the first word that came to my mind when you said that. Like,
Yeah.
it, yeah,
Yeah, that's what it is. I went to a high school that the motto was where excellence is no accident. And the crew of teachers that I had were the older, they were in their 70s when they were teaching me. So I was getting some old morals and values instilled in me before cell phones showed up in the classroom and all these distractions. And what I'm getting at is I realized I had to have good English. I had to have sensible manners so that I could be present in environments where I could learn to do what I needed to do. And the black economist Thomas Sowell, which I learned this about 5 years ago during the pandemic. I was watching Killer Mike talk about
Mhm.
everybody needs to know about Thomas Sowell. And Thomas Sowell says you only need three things to be successful in business. And I say yay in life: the knowledge, the skill, and the willingness to work.
Yep.
And so once you have that, and Thomas Sowell says this flatly and frankly, he says you cannot be stopped. And so I think Adiba, myself, and Gershon, I know you well, right? We have that indomitable spirit to persevere, and that's what wins the day. And then beyond luck, there's favor. And I know where my favor comes from. So
Yeah, I
go ahead.
I definitely I agree with everything you said, including the higher power and the higher being, a spiritual element of our lives. But one of the things that I would say is that so you when you mentioned, education, willingness, all of the cornerstones of what we need. Um, I guess the problem with not seeing larger numbers of people succeed in those communities, Gershon, is we we are fed a lot of bad information in our communities. So I accredit a lot of my success to really rejecting a lot of like the norms. I mean, in a way, I was fortunate in that I was very oppositional in school. If you talk to people that went to school, it's like, oh yeah, Teebs, he was in trouble. Like, but at the same time, my parents instilled in me, a thirst for knowledge and information. I just didn't accept it from everybody's hands. And so when you're in inner city areas, most of the people who are doing the education are are educating you for what they feel will keep you alive. What we don't realize in our communities is a lot of that education also keeps us back. And I tell my kids all the time, I say, you know, I was one of the few people that will reject a lot of information that I got from people around me because I would just, it was like really hard for me to sit and listen to these people tell me all these steps I need to take to be successful when they're poor. You know what I mean? It's like, what the hell do you know about me? And I even looking at that now. I mean, I'm not, one of the things that a lot of the older people and the elders in my family were like, you got to save, you got to don't spend your money. And there's a benefit to being fiscally responsible, frugal, whatever you want to call it. Um, but there's also a downside to that because, quite honestly, I've never seen anyone save their way to wealth. I mean, I just maybe it's happened, but I haven't. And I see people go their whole life working and saving and working and saving, and they're just a step above maybe the next person. So then you come in and you got a person like me where the dope dealers and the pimps and the hustlers on the corner. I'm looking like, man, this dude knows something. Like, not only is he still alive and got nice things, he's dressed nice, and I think that was kind of like a shift in my thinking and my thought process. Growing up, I would try to take the best out of different areas and apply them. Now, when you're young, you're just bumping your way through life. If you don't have a father and you don't have somebody to guide you, or you don't have that support structure, you're just kind of bumping your way through life. But as you get older and wiser, and you can think back, I look back and say, man, I learned so many horrible habits. And where did I get this information? It's like you said, you listen to Thomas Sowell, you start listening to different concepts of how people were obtaining wealth. As I got older, I started reading books by like Napoleon Hill and these guys, and they're like, they're teaching you how to uh, attract things and change your thought process and how you think and how you perceive things to get better outcomes. We don't learn a lot of those things when you're growing up in inner city communities. If you think of the concept of the law of attractions, and I'm bringing to me the things that I focus my energy on. Well, I started thinking about it. If I'm a teenager and I'm riding with some friends in a car, the first thing you're thinking growing up in the inner city is, shit, I hope we don't get pulled over.
Mm-hmm.
If police pull up behind you, the first thing you're doing is straightening out your cap or pulling
Oh,
your
yeah.
cap off. Everybody's setting up straight. It's like, hey, man, get ready, bro. Like, what? Rollers behind us. Like, if you hear that, like one time or 50 behind us, everybody in the car instantly gets nervous. Instantly. So what are we doing? Now our vibrations, instead of, us focusing on something different that draws different things to us, our vibrations are making this all come true. We had so many, you know, uh, 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 what do you call them, superstitions. We had a superstition growing up. We never let anybody sweep your feet. I don't know if you remember that, Pastor, but you
Oh, yeah.
never
Come
let,
on,
you said they
man.
sweep your feet, you go into jail. Like that was,
Uh-huh.
they swept your feet, you had to spit on the broom. It was
Yeah, don't
so
walk
much
on a
stuff
crack.
like, yeah, don't walk on the crack. It was so many of these superstitions, and most of it led to a very negative outcome for us. And we would spend our lives around these little, I used to watch, my mom and them wrapping money in lettuce and putting it in their part and doing all this like crazy stuff instead of really training ourselves to want to think things different. And then when I went to prison, I thought, man, wow, how is it that I could adjust to that living so well? And real shit, I started to think about how we grew up and everything in our lives was kind of like designed to kind of send you on that way. And I'm not saying it was intentionally, but it gets carried down. So your uncles, your cousins, and the people that went to prison, they come home, they're trying to prepare you for that life. You got to know this, you got to do this. Black kids in the inner city, we grow up doing push-ups, doing curls, looking at our body because we're constantly in our mind, we constantly got to be ready for combat. You go up African American community
Mm.
and you don't want to go box and do this, somebody gonna be like, well, what you gonna do if you go to jail? What you gonna do if you go to prison? But why is that our concept in our mind? There's always a negative outcome. So when you say social justice, and I hear the pastor say, hey, I was lucky, for, like, and you put that luck in front, it's because we understand that at any given day and situation, it could have been totally different for us,
Mhm.
even if we made it out of
Yeah.
the bad things, because we watch good people go to jail. We watch good people get killed. We watch people do it all the right way and have the wrong outcomes.
Mhm.
So let me
I
jump
mean,
in. Did you
yeah,
did
I mean,
did you
go ahead.
guys did you guys think growing up that prison was just inevitable, or did you think, oh, if I work my ass off, I can get out of here?
Well, okay, so I'll tell you how I felt. I felt like when I was growing up, especially, in the early 80s and mid 80s when the crack epidemic started to really take root. Most of us black kids were growing up in those inner city areas. We were hearing and seeing every day that the majority of us weren't going to live to get old. So we were predicting a lifespan of like maybe your 20s, and if you're lucky, into your 30s. And so that whole concept of, you know, I'm not going to make it out of here kind of tells you you're on short time. For me personally, I grew up going to see so many family members and visiting jails like my whole life. I always thought that's not going to be me. I look at cats in the street, and even though I was a street kid, I kind of felt like I'm too smart for that. I'm gonna do smarter than everybody. Like I'm not going to end up in these situations. But I think deep down inside, you kind of know as a black kid, if you end up on the wrong side of that fence, it's going to be a coin toss of whether you go or you stay. Because you've seen a couple people dodge a bullet, but that doesn't mean, because it only takes one time. I think, Pastor, you were saying last week you got caught up in a situation that could have ended like totally in a
I
in a
mean,
in a totally
more than
different
once,
outcome.
like you said too. You said, when you said what you said people would think that I learned, but I did other stuff, and likewise, I just mentioned that one, but this
Yeah.
this so let me answer that question too, then, because man, as I'm listening to you, it brings back so much that I grew up in the suburbs, but it goes deeper than that. It was because um, I'm pointing that out because I came from a Caribbean tradition, so a
Mm,
Black Caribbean tradition, where in the islands where we live, we are the majority. Even though a minority has many times taken the economic lead, we are the majority. So there's an ethos that is in our upbringing that is mentioned. My father would say something. It wasn't true in the end of the day, I realized, but he said it. And he says, I want you to know that none of your people were slaves. I mean, impossible. It's just coming being on this side, that's not necessarily
right,
possible.
right, right, right,
But at the time, he would say that and he'd be like, so I don't want you talking this way. I don't want you dressing this way. So as the trends were, the bomber jackets were coming out and dudes were getting shot for these. Where I went to church and where I went to school, people were getting robbed for these items, sneakers, Pumas, and things like that, fat laces, and so people were getting killed over Jordans, Lee
right,
jeans,
right.
Lee jeans, killed.
Yep.
So, so I didn't grow up thinking um, that jail is inevitable, but I knew about jail. And it was mainly because of religion, because of church. My father would get that late night call that my father pastored for 56 years. Uh, and in very urban areas, but again, we always lived in the suburbs. I grew up in a time as well where my father would outrun the police in his car. And if he got caught, though, he could have got shot. And
Yeah.
and so I grew up with that, but I couldn't do that by the time I was driving, and I've been pulled over
Right.
at gunpoint and all that madness. So I've experienced a lot of it, but I didn't think jail was inevitable. I thought as long as I was wise about my actions, I could avoid jail. So I learned to talk. I wasn't much of a fighter either, so I learned to talk. So
Yeah.
again, I'll just wrap it by saying jail was not inevitable in my mind, but I saw enough of it to know that it was real, and I didn't want to be there.
Okay, Andre, let me ask you then. Uh, are we feeling kids long before they hit the courtroom?
I think that yes, if we go back to education and Atiba said something earlier on that education front. Um, the system that we've been in for school has been for a worker mindset. And you can go back to the 60s when the Trilateral Commission, because I only like to talk facts, I don't like to talk fiction. The Commission met back in the 60s, and the Vietnam War was taking place, and they were concerned. They wanted to study why did the university students care about what was going over in some little Asian place, Vietnam, right? And so the study came back. They had businessmen, university professors, all of that on board. The study came back with the answer that the education was too well rounded. So because it wasn't focused in on something specific, they had, they had opinions on all these different things. So right after that study came out, it was moved forward that the U.S. educational system would be shifted to more of a worker-minded focus. And so they went and did a study some years later at a company that made missiles. And they were asking, this is across the board. This is not just a lower socioeconomic thing. This was in general, the public school system and otherwise. They went and did a study at the missile company, and they asked the guy that built missiles, engineer, et cetera, what was the worst part about his job? And you would think he felt bad that he made missiles that kill people. But the blinders had been put on where he said, man, I wish we had faster computers. Yeah. Years later, they
Yeah.
tested. And so it was the system was successful in giving us the ABCs, the one, two, threes, the primary colors, which are the tools that we could take and put into infinite combinations and create anything, cure cancer. You need those tools to cure cancer or AIDS or whatever, or world hunger. But we're given those tools, but we're not. And Atiba said it earlier. I got to give him credit. We're not taught how to use those tools often. And I grew up in the suburbs, and I didn't get some of those tools. I got some of those tools along the way. My father taught me to do a lot of things, but he didn't teach me about absorptive capacity. and I'll stop. I'll just crash the plane right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, everything you just said was like just absolutely 100% on point. And to answer your question, Gerson, I think society, I think society's doing what it was intended to do. I think that the plan was put in place years and years ago, and the problem with the majority of people is they just kept going along with the plan. It's like, you know, there's a saying I heard, years and years ago. It was tradition minus questioning equals slavery. And we just continue to keep doing things without questioning why we're doing some of them. So in a lot of inner city areas with poor people, let me use this phrase with poor people. Poor people have been conditioned to value, especially the difference in males and females. And I'll say my experience in the African American community, specific to the African American, because I don't want to draw this whole, hey, it's all poor people. But let me say this specific to the African American community. We value men being physically strong, more than we do males being mentally strong. So if you look at a couple little kids and you see kids playing, the little girl, oh, she's a straight A student and she's this and she's dressed nice and she's going to be a doctor, she's going to be a lawyer. But if I'm a little black boy, it's like a lot of our mothers, and I know this is a generalization, will value man's ability to fight. Man can fight. He dressing like a little man. Man got chains on. He can play football. He can play basketball. Man is track. Whatever physically that we can dominate in, we're gonna be exalted on that. And you even see that in the record industries and everything. Athletes, entertainers, physically strong. But at the same time, we also will put the females before the males a lot of times in the African American community when it comes to intellectual things. It's like, no one's going to look at, and I don't mean to, call out, shout out, people, but let's just think if you're a boxer, you're a millionaire, you're a heavyweight boxer, you're middleweight, lightweight, whatever, and you're a multi-millionaire, maybe even a billionaire. Nobody cares that you can't read. Nobody cares that you're not real smart. You're going to still be at the top of your game. And so within our communities and within our culture, we've done a lot of that ourselves. And that was, those are conditioning from slavery. Let's put the female out here and show that she can lead. And the way that was done was by abusive and traumatic disciplines done to men. We're going to make an example of them. And that same thing happens today. I hear black women who it's the same thing. They'll if you go look at any little league football team or whatever, they're all behind their kids. But when it comes to physical activity, that's good. But intellectually, if that kid starts to question the norms of society, why can't I wear a hoodie because I'm a little black boy? You get the majority of black women that I've spoke to, they're more concerned about their kids staying alive. You know what? Don't put that hoodie on. Don't dress like that. Don't do this because these are the things that'll keep you alive versus a mentality that it's not right that we're not treated equally. It's not right that I got to be condensed to only having these sectors of the community that I can be good in. And we don't champion against that. So I know that's a mouthful, but
No, I mean, and it needed, you made me think of something I heard just the other day that your children will not listen to about 97% of what you say, but they will for sure do 100% of what you do, right?
absolutely
And there's a lot of, some of it is modeled not intentionally, right? You go to jail, you're not trying to intentionally model that, but it happens,
right.
right? And our children are faced with, these things that they see and they learn. Now, I was trying to, kind of continue on something you were saying there. Um, ah,
Well, the pastor's getting old. So let me
yeah,
ask,
I'm saying, no, no, no.
so so far you guys have talked about environment, you've talked
Hmm.
about economics, you
Hmm.
you've taught no one's really touched much on the lack of opportunity. To which one of those three, or is it a combination of all three, that get these people caught up in the system?
Well, I think the lack of opportunity, it depends on where you fall in the system. I think the system starts out in schools and grade school. So if you're a young kid and you're compliant, that's the only way you're going to bump up to the next levels. If you challenge anything in within the programming structure, the educational institutions, you're going to be considered an outlier and you're going to be pushed to the side. So if you look at young kids that aren't willing to play the game, you got brilliant kids that are in school that all it takes is for you to start to develop a reputation and you're already going to be kind of streamlined down this line of not having opportunities. So if you're very compliant and you're one that's willing to do everything, then there's going to be opportunities. I mean, I definitely say we live in society now where if because the majority of African Americans are facing so many social ills, if you're one of the ones that make it up out of that, then they look at you and they're going to award you. I think the problem that exists today is that a lot of the kids who are taking advantage of the opportunities are African American kids coming from really insulated environments where they're protected from a lot of those social ills. So if you look at the stats on African Americans going to suburban schools or private schools, I think we fare well. I haven't seen that us lagging a line. Pastor, please jump in. You went to suburban schools. But when you get in a public school system, it doesn't matter if you're doing well because test wise and scoring wise and ranking wise, you're so far down
Yeah.
the level that you're not going to be on that same playing field with a lot of those other kids anyways.
Two things with that. Those Iowa tests and stuff like that they used to do, the standardized tests. And they used to say, oh, always that minority kids didn't do as well, right? And I think there's two sides to that, didn't do as well. One was, you know, if the questions are geared towards a certain socioeconomic strata, the
Yeah,
parents are engineers and lawyers and teachers and et cetera, and hear these terms frequently in their home, certain words, certain vocabulary terms, and certain concepts and different things like that. There's already that edge, and we talked about that in our last session a bit.
yeah,
But then there's also where the teachers in certain schools, and I went to a Christian school in the hood that basically my teachers were great. And again, I still had teachers that were instilling certain values and morals and et cetera. But when it came to those tests, they didn't have time to go and give us preps on that. And it wasn't until I was in graduate school, already worked as a pastor for some years, that a brain researcher that I was using as a life coach uh, said she also took students and taught them how to pass the dentistry exam, the LSATs, the MCATs, and also high school students for the SATs and the SATs. And she pointed out to me, she said, Andre, you can go read the questions for like the comprehensive reading portion. She said you can go
right,
read the questions before you actually read the whatever they gave you, so that your brain
right.
will pick up it'll see. That's how the brain works. And I was like, wow, thanks. Now, when you go to certain schools, certain pay like $30,000 a year elementary schools, Montessori type and whatever other terms, you go to certain boarding high schools, you go to certain caliber Ivy League or elite colleges and universities, then there's smaller settings, smaller student numbers, and they can actually sit and teach you beyond the letters, numbers, colors, symbols, etc., into how to operate in this way. I call it essential mental technology, a little term I coined, right? And so she was like, I didn't know that, and I'm a grown man. If
Yeah.
that would have helped me when I was taking those standardized tests to do better, and I'm good at reading, but I just sucked at it. So again, yes, depending on where you live, opportunities are become abundant.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the same experience. I had never had that type of training until I was, taking what's the graduate entry? Was it GREs or whatever?
GMAT or GRE?
Yeah, GMAT. When I had to do that, like in some of my friends who had graduated undergrad were like, "Well, where are you going? Where are you?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "Well, you can get, the questions, the training." And I went and started doing the courses and learning like how many of these institutions out there would prep you. And then when my kids went to school, it was like, "Oh shit, how can they fail? They're prepping them from this from grade school, so they already know how to test higher because." They know like the foundation of how those test questions are answered. And so even by the process of elimination, they get to a better resolution and test score than us. Like when we're like you said, when you don't know that, you're just you either know it or you don't know it. And a lot of test scores, you're gonna be tested on how close you are as well. It won't just necessarily be a right or wrong answer. So if you think about it, you were saying earlier, what you're exposed to, if you have a question, about distance, to another country or something like that and calculating mileage, well, if you've never been out of it, if you come from a Midwestern city that you've never been out of it, you won't even know, you don't even have an estimate of what distance is. If somebody said to you, how far away is California? Well, you can figure that out if you've actually been to Colorado or, California or anywhere close. But if you've
Mhm.
never traveled outside of your city, you can't even calculate. You can look at a map and say, well, I've been to Atlanta. It looks at least more than three times further than that. But if you've never been anywhere and
Mhm.
you've been to Atlanta, you say, well, I know Atlanta is roughly 500 miles from me here. So then if you say three times it, maybe it's 3,000 miles away. Maybe I can calculate that. But if I don't know and I'm just guessing and I put 10,000 miles away, well, everybody thinks I'm a total damn idiot. And that,
And I can vouch for that in real life. My father drove 18 wheelers as well as pastoring, right? And
right.
he would do it for the church that he worked for. They would move pastors, and he would say, "Hey, I'll do it, save you guys some money, but you still got to pay me something, right?" But he would take my brother and I from a young age on the road with him during our spring breaks, our summers, whatever. And so I drove from New Jersey to Colorado to or Jersey to California or whatever, all of Rhode Island. And to your point, once you travel is an antidote for a lot of hate and
Yeah.
any of the isms, travel.
Yeah.
And I did learn a lot by virtue of that, and automatically, like you said, would be able to calculate just by virtue of exposure. And that's a big, I
Right.
think maybe that's a big point here is exposure has a big part in changing trajectories.
Yeah. And
Do do you guys
there's
think do you guys think that if people were able to get out of their situation and go travel, that this whole system might be not as impacted as it is? Is that what you're trying to say?
Oh, well, I mean, I think there's a lot of variables. Travel is a definite variable because it gets you out of your environment. When you don't know anything but your environment, how can you even think beyond,
Yeah.
the few things that you've seen? And how do you get exception into the larger, broader society when they're looking at you as someone who is has a deficit or a deficiency in terms of their knowledge and know-how? There was a test called the Chitlin test years ago. I wish I had a copy. I had when I first got out of undergrad, I had a copy of it, and I remember I used to
Google that
love
thing,
it.
man.
Yeah, you hit if you find a chitlin test and you give it to white people, it totally flips the script on them. It's a test that is they're just really common things that black families would know in the United States that most people don't. And it's crazy because there's questions on there like what is a case quarter? And or a case dime or
Mm.
something. You say what is a case quarter to most people, and they're like, a what?
Mhm.
A fucking what? You know what I mean? It's like, but little things like that, like asking for multiple uses of what you would use, a chitlin container. You know what I mean? And for for a mop bucket. B for like you have all these questions, but if you didn't grow up in our communities,
Context.
you feel like an idiot taking that test. And so it's kind of the reverse of what a lot of kids that grow up in inner city areas where they're only exposed to their neighborhood. they can answer everything about things that they see in their every normal day-to-day life, but larger society doesn't really look at what African Americans do in their larger part of life. You know, I'm in Colombia, and I'm an American, so all they think I know in terms of food is hamburgers, pizza, hot dogs. You know, if I start talking, yeah, you know, and I tell them, my mama fried chicken better than everybody down here. Like, you know what I mean? And we talk about greens and potato salad and cornbread and stuff like, but they have no concept that anybody in America has a different. So blacks are kind of like a subculture in America, and in a larger portion of the world, the things that are important to us other people don't know. If somebody said, "Oh, you know,
Context, man.
what kind of car does your uncle have?" and he say like a deuce deuce and a quarter, most
Hmm.
people would look and be like, "A what?"
Hmm.
But those are things we
Or
grew up.
that's the 425, four.
224, deuce
Uh-huh.
deuce and a quarter, two
Deuce and
two two
quarter.
four Oldsmobiles.
Then you got the Pontiacs with the four something. Yeah.
Yeah, 442. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, 442. That's what it is. Yeah.
Well,
I
you
mean,
know, Andre just knows 535.
yeah, I just know BMW. Yeah, I can't help it. You know, you know, man, I think I wrote it down. Contextual intelligence. I wanted to go there for a second because you really brought home that there is this dichotomy of context. That if we're operating in my context, there's definitely going to be people who couldn't operate in that, right? And culturally, et cetera. So, you know, one of my professors from Pepperdine, Dr. Kurt Matamidi, he's a strategy professor, and if you look him up, he does this thing on contextual intelligence. In other words, as long as you have that, that's the starting point. You can pretty much do any job. You could be a head. I don't play basketball. I'll watch the championship games, but I do other stuff, right? But I could go be an NBA coach. As crazy as that sounds, I'm confident that I could go be an NBA coach. And Gershon is like, BS, BS, BS. But I see. I believe in my
I
heart.
believe you can too.
Why? Because contextual intelligence leads to contextual competence. This is Kurt Matamidi's words. Contextual intelligence leads to contextual competence, which helps you to take astute action as you plan, implement, and manage for change. And if you can operate that, in other words, I say it in most simple terms is um, how's it go? Knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Remember that, Gershon?
I sure do. I use it all the
Knowing
time.
that knowing, well, say it for me so I don't jack it up. Knowing.
You know that a tomato's a fruit,
Mhm.
but you should also know that you don't want to put a tomato into a fruit salad.
So, in other words, knowledge is knowing. That's what it was. Knowledge
Yeah,
is knowing that a
yeah,
tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put it in fruit salad. There's a
yeah,
lot of information out there, but who's going to tell us what to do with it?
yeah.
When we learn what to do with it, I'm stuck on saying we can't be stopped. I don't care where we come from, and it's been proven over and over and over again. I want to say this: we are shifting, and we talked about the digital transformation briefly last time. And Gershon, stop me if I'm going over time here. The digital transformation, if our people, period, because we're moving from the haves and the have-nots to the haves and the have-a-lots. They're ending the system of exploitation and they're moving to a system of irrelevance. You will be irrelevant and nobody will be mad because they're going to say justice was served. How? Because the data will prove that there's some form of equity going on, right?
Right.
Everybody, there's going to be, and I guess that's the sustainable development podcast that we'll do after recidivism. But I want to say that let's show people at some point in this series that we're doing, the people that are scared that they're going to go back into the prison, the people that are looking at these systems that are now being dismantled and new systems being put together, how they can thrive in this new setup that we're heading into. And I believe that's if we can accomplish that as well, that'll be helpful.
Well,
I'm glad.
the next
Go ahead.
episode I
Sorry.
wanted to do was like, is freedom really free? Right? Is it
Hmm.
once they get out? And I definitely want to talk about that. But Andre, you're bringing up so many points. We're going to make this like a 15, 18 podcast series, which is fine by me because I love talking to both of you because, like I said, I'm just always trying to chase knowledge. And so, one of the questions I do have is that I remember growing up, people would always say they went to prison because they're bad. How would you respond to someone who says that now?
Well, I was going to just say, I mean, it depends on your perception of bad. I mean, we're so fortunate that we've been able to see in the last couple of years, we've been able to see how that can be a matter of perception because you had the left side of our political structure in our government saying that the person running for president was a criminal and that he was bad and everything he did, was bad, and we got to protect the world from this person. Now that he's elected as president, you've got the whole right side of the political structure saying, no, those are the bad ones. Those are the ones who condemn people, innocent people of things that they didn't do. So I think, you could look at so many different aspects of that question, but I don't think it's black and white as a good and bad. I mean, laws change, situations, societies, social norms, everything changed. Now, in the context of what the larger society believes, they believe all criminals are bad because the media perpetuates something that says all these people are bad. And the reason why I say the media perpetuates that is because we don't really have a truly reformed system. We're just talking about what skills these people have coming in and from prison. Well, look at Dr. Sean Stevens. And the reason why ETV is successful is because he did 20 years in prison and the work that he did in prison and the work that he's able to do now. And he's able to engage all these people coming home from prison. Now, if you think about it,
can I stop you there right
sure.
quick? Like, so what could we have done to keep Sean from going to prison? Because he learned his lessons once he was in prison. How could we have taught him those lessons before he went, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, we say he learned his lessons in prison, but he did 20 years and the attorney that represented him in his case didn't even have a law degree. He grew up in foster care, as an orphan. He grew up, poor. So there was so many steps along the way. But okay, you could go back and say a lot of things that kept him, from going to prison. But what I would say is no one, when he came out of prison, even though he had worked for some of the most notorious organized crime and gang units in the entire country, no one gave him credit for having business knowledge. And I tell people now that professionals I work with, and they say, they're quick to dismiss things that he's saying. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And I'm saying this dude was a millionaire in his 20s. This guy has worked with the Gambino family. He knows pretty much every a gangster or criminal organization that in the country. And we in society say, well, all those are bad units. No, they're not. They're businesses. I don't give a fuck what nobody says. Running a organized crime or cartel, those are businesses. Now you could say, yeah, there's a huge criminal aspect to them, but for them to be organized to generate hundreds of millions and sometimes billions of dollars in revenue, they're business mind. They were trained to think like that. So even though he did 20 years, he comes out, has no experience in terms of administrative skills and corporations and things like this, but he thinks more like high level business people. He thinks more like, a Donald Trump or some of the heads of these big organizations in our city. And I know because many of those people have sat on my boards and I've worked with them. most of the people that work in those companies aren't the same as the people who founded and started those companies. And so people look at him and say, how's he building this big organization and how is he doing this? It's because he's had informal training that he's not been acknowledged from. On the streets, you hear people say, well, that dude was a boss. I mean, if you take that boss term and you translate it from the streets, that's a founder, or those are your Elon Musk and Bill Gates, the heads of these big multi-billion-dollar companies. Street terms, those are bosses. They think different than workers. I mean, this guy, he don't work well. He doesn't work well in between those lines and boundary. But in terms of vision, in terms of a higher level of thinking, and he's the same person that's validated by the streets. So hitters, killers, gangsters coming home, they don't look at him and say, who is this motherfucker right here? Because they used to work for him. So they come home to him saying, hey, I need some work. And all he's saying is, we ain't going to do it in the streets this time. We're going to do it out here, and we're going to do it like this. But he still gets that respect because, for lack of a better word, he has informal credentials that aren't accounted for. You could go, I've said this many times. I could go get 100 dudes in the state of Ohio. Let me go get 100 cats out of prison and handpick and go look for the personalities that we want to keep these communities safe. And I'll cut crime on any side of town by probably 70-80% within a year. I could take crime away instantly because that's what these people were good at. If you think about it, what companies build the safest vaults in the world? The companies that employ the people who know how to break into them. Mm-hmm. But only when it comes to those incarcerated people who were seen as street people do we not validate them for having the knowledge and having skill sets that translate over into the community. And I can tell you, I can take you to the roughest hood bars in our city, and you'll walk and you'll see a motherfucker, excuse my language, see a dude standing at the door with no gun, no bulletproof vest, and you won't have a problem. I guarantee you. Mm-hmm. You can't pay somebody to go up in there and start a problem. If you're ever in the hood, Gershon, and you see a fancy car, a car that's all decked out, I don't care if it's $100,000 car and it's cold and it's running and nobody's in it, you're not going to pay a motherfucker to get in that car. Because trust and believe they know who it belongs to. Am I saying something wrong, Pastor?
You are telling the truth, and I'm going to get in on the edge of that. I'm going to get in on the wing of that right there. Gershon, your question about are these just bad people? I don't want to quote you incorrect.
Correct.
Right. Let me tell you something. What we're looking at systemically, and we're looking at children. We talked about it in the last one, from the school to prison pipeline, who make mistakes like fighting. My 16 she'll be 17 next week, right? She'll be 17 on Sunday. She's gotten in 2 fights recently. Did I talk about this on the last one?
You talked to me on the phone about it.
Yeah. 2 fights. Now she's a junior. She finally really was getting down the road properly. But this year, her junior year, and she's doing exceptionally well. She got in 2 fights, attacked both times, and she retaliated. But the school policy is that she gets suspended. The second time, the police officer who's met myself and my wife on multiple occasions and knows that, hey, we show up for our daughter and we care, told her, Alandra, and I just called her name, you got to wipe that out. If you get in another fight, I have to arrest you. She's a teenager and wants to defend herself. So I had to go through a talk with her about that. And that's a separate conversation about how to operate in that situation. But if she was to go to jail, she gets is that a felony? Assault and battery is a misdemeanor or felony? Misdemeanor.
It'd probably be a misdemeanor for what she's doing.
Now, and every time now that she's out in public, she has to report that to jobs that she wants to get. So bad person, she'll be a very frustrated, angry person and could end up choosing a bad path, right? And here's a child that's grown up in the suburbs right here, right? But she's in a school where these situations happen. So what I'm getting at, because I wrote a lot of notes and actually a couple quotes, informal credentials, that's a serious thing. So we're talking about children who end up in a system that starts with juvenile detention. There's group homes, right? There's group homes that was mentioned earlier, right? And the people that run those group homes, they get paid $300 a day per child. And that's every day of the month. There's no weekends on that. Whether the child is
Right.
in school all day, they're getting $300 a day. You start doing the math and you realize that's another business, right?
Yep,
In the
absolutely.
layers of the prison industrial complex. Go ahead, Atiba.
No, I was agreeing with you. I'm sorry. I didn't
Yeah,
mean to
that's
cut you
okay.
off,
Now
bro.
listen, man. I mean, I'm taking notes off of what you're saying. So listen, chime in. So there's juvenile detention. There's work programs like work farms that they have to show up to. There's community service. As a pastor, I get a lot of kids that get the diversion program. And my daughter has been blessed to get a diversion program, right? Before. And not everybody's so blessed or lucky, right? So anyway, so children are getting arrested. The age of adjudication, as we talked about last time, was lowered in the state of Florida to the age of 14, which means you could go to adult prison as a 14-year-old. And that's what they're not showing us.
Right. Right.
That's what we're not seeing. And so something must be done. And so there's the recidivism part. And I've actually wrote some notes, sent you a text, Gershon, afterwards. I said, I forgot to mention that some of the simple reasons that people are going to jail was that they have unpaid parking tickets. Bad people? No, it's a jacked up system that preys on poor people because when you go to the court, you see the poor people there and the people that have the means, their lawyer is there and knows the prosecutor, knows the judge. They don't even have to show up, it's just handled. So anyway, I know I swerved all over, but I simply say that the bad people should be the people that are bringing the cocaine and opium into this country by the tons, because ain't no poor people bringing that stuff in. They might be in the distribution arm of it, but that means they've been expendable. So
Absolutely.
They've been
Absolutely.
exploited. They've been exploited,
And
Andre.
and they've already done these experiments. Atiba, you mentioned experiment, lab rat experiment. The psychologists that they hire, because they don't do anything by chance, have already run the experiment on how people will operate under certain circumstances. And so the bad people are the people that are pulling the strings.
yeah, and anybody who doesn't conform to what they're saying is, so think of the message that you send to young kids that are in school. Anytime you disagree with the structure of the school, anytime you disagree with the norms that we set in place, we're going to penalize you and we're going to make it harder for you to get to the next level and do anything. You know, you talk about kids fighting in school, it automatically turns into you were fighting, you're this aggressive
That
person, and
person.
we got to treat you like this. Not only does that, let's just say even afterward, if they're saying, okay, we dropped the charges and everything, the arrest record still exists. If they were to arrest her, the arrest record still exists and it's public record.
She gets pulled
So
over.
what happened? Yeah, exactly. So it continues to follow, and it's a system of we're only going to reward those who comply and do everything we say. We got to ask ourselves, are there times when a person should fight for something? And I'm not sitting here trying to, rationalize and defend. I don't even know the situation, but we need to stop having a blanket reaction to every situation that happens. I had my kids went to private. Well, my youngest kids went to private school, and my son. We were at a school event, and he got into a fight with another kid. This is at a soccer event. Um, and maybe in second, third grade. I mean, he's little. I mean, they're little, and they're huffing and puffing, and they're all mad. So the parents pull them apart and set them down. And at the time, my ex-wife is just livid. She's going crazy, and I look and see the other guy's wife going crazy, and they're all in a frantic. And the boys are more scared of that behavior than anything, and they're just pouring, they're crying, they're shamed, they're embarrassed in front of all these the whole school is there, administrators, everything. You know how private schools are. Long story short, I get up after about 15, 20 minutes and I walk over to the other kid's parent. I said, hey, bro, it's a brother. I said, hey, man, listen, they're kids, man. I don't know how you feel, but I feel like this is natural kid behavior. We're men. We know that. We argue over things. So why really penalize them? He said, man, I'm so glad you came over here, but I feel the same way. I said, if you cool with it, I think we have them shake hands, we have them apologize to each other, and let them go play. And that's exactly what we did. My ex-wife was furious. They do not allow that at this school. This is not allowed. This is not appropriate. All the teachers, everybody just thought that we made the worst decision by allowing those kids to go. And I'm thinking, these are little boys
Mhm.
that have testosterone and energy running through their blood out on a playground, kicking a fucking soccer ball. Of course, at some point, there's going to be conflict. There's a problem if there's not conflict
Mhm.
between young kids in a competitive sport. But
Mhm.
that's how some of these schools, they're starting to take these concepts and create these indoctrinations that we can't have any violence, we can't have any conflict.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, wait a
That's
minute,
unrealistic.
that's not realistic.
Yeah.
Conflict can be intelligent in defense. I mean,
There's a word that's been weaponized, and that is privilege, right? So let's unweaponize it for a moment so we can use it appropriately in this setting. Um, there are children who grow up seeing that if they get pulled over, if their parents are pulled over, and I'm using socioeconomics rather than race, right? Let's just for a moment.
right, right,
They get pulled over in their neighborhood. It's like, hey, Mr. Jones, listen, just slow it down. And you get to go on. Just like you gave those kids a pass. And your wife was like,
right,
no, we ain't giving them no pass. Because you do have the right to press or whatever. But sometimes
yeah,
in life, we realize we get a chance and we do, if you know better, do better. We send them on their
right,
way. Christ did that with the woman caught in adultery. We're your accusers. They're none. They've left. He says, neither do I, do it. Go on, right? Uh,
right,
and don't live like this no more, right? Those hopefully those boys learn their lesson, etc. Right? However, um, there's another treatment where you don't even get that chance, and you're
right,
you're you're gonna get fined, you're gonna get jailed, you're gonna get whatever, period. And so I think that recognizing that that type of privilege exists, we realize that's something that has to be addressed. That has to, that ground needs to there needs to be parity. Remember, I talked about
yeah,
parity earlier, across the board on that, not some kind of unevenness. My nephews, and this is the last thing I'll say in regard to that. My nephews live in the Bahamas. My sister has two boys. They're young teenagers now. I was driving my brother-in-law's vehicle. He's a chiropractor in the Bahamas, and I'm coming around a curve, and my nephews are in the back on laptops and tablets with no seatbelts on. And you're driving slow, coming around, whatever. And there's an officer there, and she pulls us over in the Bahamas, in Nassau. She pulls us over, and my nephew whispers, "Tell him my father's Dr. Marshall." Now, in the United States, you think he'd ever dare even think that? So that struck me first. And I'm like,
right,
nah, son, sit back. I'm gonna have to handle this. I didn't even know what I got pulled over for. She says,
right, right,
these kids don't have a seatbelt on. She hears my American accent and she says, whose car is this? And I say, it's my brother-in-law. Now I get to use it legitimately. My brother-in-law, Dr. Dwight. Oh, that's my chiropractor. And she was like, go on, but yo, them kids could have got you $500 a piece.
yeah,
And I'm moving on, and I'm like, bigger for me is that this kid knew that he had privilege with the
right,
police.
right.
In America, that typically does not happen. And it's a real thing. So, and that part right there lands a lot of people in this broken cycle that we're speaking on.
So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close up this episode, and then we can get going with the next episode right where we left off. Because what I'm hearing is we're very quick to judge in this country and where they end up. We never sit back and ask, how did they truly end up there? And that's something I think
Yeah,
we need to change the way we think, or else the revolving door will just keep spinning. So,
absolutely.
so Andre, Atiba, it was great talking to you guys today. I'm going to, we'll be back with the next episode. I hope no one misses it. If you guys have any likes, comments, want us to talk about anything, please leave it there on the socials, pacific.lens.studios. If you enjoy Andre's outfit, he is child of God. He has wonderful, wonderful, you got sweatshirts, you got
Sweatshirts, hoodies.
hoodies,
We have
t-shirts.
a special edition for my brother's commemoration. He died of
Absolutely.
colon cancer. Yep.
Absolutely. So until next time, we'll talk to y'all soon.